Steve Jobs and Satoru Iwata. They both have their own personal mythology, which couldn't be more different. One is the fiery taskmaster, and the other as the iron fist with the velvet touch. These men are both fascinating. The industry they work in and their particular fields wouldn't have been the same without either. They were that important. But what do they have in common? Taking the cultural difference into account, it's fascinating to see where the similarities converge and where they deviate. Let's start with Iwata. He was born in Sapporo, Japan. His father was a municipal mayor. Steve Jobs was born in Palo Alto, California, to an unwed graduate student who later put him up for adoption. He was raised by two salt-of-the-earth adoptive parents who were as different from his temperament as much as possible. Even here, the differences are striking. They both grew up in similar times. Iwata was born in 1959 and Jobs in 1955. Their respective environments are an interesting aside. Jobs was born in summery Palo Alto, whereas Iwata was born in the harsh cold of Sapporo, Japan. Even in the summer, Sapporo has an average high of 77 degrees Fahrenheit. In a subliminal way, perhaps this had an influence on their outlooks. Perhaps it was this that forced Iwata to actively seek out the warmth and focus on it rather than curse the cold. Another huge difference is their parents. Jobs' parents catered to his whims, only really saying no when it wasn't economically feasible, but even then, if he could push them, he would. Iwata's parents, on the other hand, were, from what we can gather, more strict. They didn't care for him joining HAL Lab when it was an unproven startup run out of an apartment. This was the rare circumstance where Iwata ignored his parents' wishes and forged ahead on his own path. But one thing that Iwata never had to deal with was the question of parentage. This was the albatross that Steve would carry for most of his life. Perhaps it was this lack of control and having no say in the matter that made him what some would call a control freak. Iwata grew up in a nuclear family and never had to contend with these issues. Perhaps because he wasn't burdened with this, that he was able to develop the technical proficiency that he was a master at, as opposed to Steve Jobs, who had a basic grasp of the technology but couldn't ascend to the same level of wizardry. Another difference was that Steve Jobs had to go across the world to figure himself out. Satoru Iwata didn't seem to take this path. While his proficiency in English suggests that he might have gone overseas, I can't find any evidence to back this up. But in all honesty, if he can teach himself how to program in the infancy of computers, then it comes as no surprise that he could have taught himself English. If there was a comparative for Steve Jobs, it would be his stylistic taste. This was what led the early Apple computers to having beautiful fonts in the lettering. Perhaps one of the biggest differences aside from their temperaments is that Iwata never had to fall away from either HAL or Nintendo, though this is also where their great similarities arise. They were both intensely loyal. Though Jobs left Apple for 13 years, he only started 2 new companies, one of which was absorbed by Apple. Perhaps it was their temperaments that played into this loyalty, though they were so different. Iwata's loyalty came out of contentment and gratitude, though Jobs' loyalty out of a personal trauma and desire for control. You have to wonder if their technical proficiencies had anything to do with how they conducted themselves as people. Iwata knew the inner workings of technology, so he never had to get heated up and upset because he could solve the problem himself. Jobs made up for his lack of technical efficiency by getting people revved up and forced to think differently. One thing's for sure, when they both died in their mid-50s, they both died leaving behind a legacy, having changed the industry, and being loved by many.
On my business card, I am a corporate president. In my mind, I am a game developer. But in my heart, I am a gamer.
And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.